Greg Steube's with me, congressman from Florida, at Rep. Greg Steube on Twitter, Steube, with the spelling there. Congressman, great to have you back on the show. I hope you brought your handkerchief with you, because I'm going to ask you about January 6th, and I know that this is inducing a lot of sobs from people. I was watching some of your colleagues weep in a public hearing yesterday over something. I am stunned by the theatrics of it, the patent, the bogus nature of the performance art that we're witnessing from your colleagues. When you got to the Congress, did you think it was going to be like this?
No, and somebody, I don't know who it was, but somebody tweeted like a video of best Oscar nominee for Kinzinger yesterday and had his face emblazoned on like somebody accepting an Oscar. I thought it was pretty funny, but
yeah, I laughed hard at that.
And that's what this is all about. This is all about creating drama where there's not drama, creating this narrative that Nancy Pelosi wants to continue for as long as she can possibly continue to the American people about things that actually she's at fault for. She's responsible for the safety and security of that chamber, no one else. And there was one comment yesterday from one of the officers saying that they were woefully underprepared, and not a single member of that committee followed up on that. Not a single member, which is why they didn't want Jim Jordan on there, which is why they didn't want Jim Banks on there, which is why they didn't want Republicans who were going to actually ask tough questions.
So one of the things that I talk about so much on Breitbart is narrative and what the main objective is. I think so much of what the Democrats are doing these days is it's not really about trying to get to the bottom of something or to advance something, as they're trying to control narrative. And you see what's happening right now. They're trying to make us all live in incredible fear of the Delta variant of the coronavirus. You have to say it like that, Congressman. You have to say it with a super deep voice, because it's the biggest threat ever, other than those horrible Trump supporters on January 6th. And in the meantime, we're ignoring just major things that are happening. We've had some big reports this week on Breitbart about how Eric Swalwell, the details of the Chinese infiltration into his life with Fang Fang, the spy, the honeypot spy. We know that our border, we're seeing a surge of people, many with the coronavirus, surging over our border at huge numbers. The Biden inflation that's taking place, huge holdups in our supply chain that are slowing down commerce. There's all of these problems that are affecting normal lives, and yet we keep being told to focus on these things that are not as big of a deal for the vast majority of us.
We have an invasion at our southern border where more than 35% of the people coming across have COVID. And I just talked to another member today who's also a physician and said that they're bringing over the Lambda variant. So you haven't heard about that. We're all talking about the Delta variant. Now it's the Lambda variant. I'm going to call that the Biden variant, because he's allowing for this variant to come across the border unchecked. They're not doing anything to these illegal immigrants, and then they're shipping them and transporting them all across the country and spreading the virus. If they really cared about COVID and they really cared about the health and safety of Americans, the border would be shut down. There would not be anybody allowed in this country, period, during a global pandemic, as they like to call it. And you wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing. And then they're going to tell us, as more than 70% of the House has been vaccinated. Of those that haven't been vaccinated, the majority of them have had COVID. So you have what they would define as herd immunity on the House floor. And today we are now required not just to wear a mask on the House floor, but to wear a medical grade mask, KN95, on the House floor, where almost every single member either has had COVID or has been vaccinated. How is that for science?
So let's try, and I know that there's no good answer to this, but what I've been trying to understand, first of all, is how you could have the CDC just 2 months ago flat out say, if you've been vaccinated, you don't need a mask, which seems to be the case. I've got medical doctors in my family. They all say exactly that. And then now all of a sudden, 2 months later, we're now on, even if you've been vaccinated, you must wear a mask. There's even some suggestion that you're supposed to wear a mask in your own house with your kids. This might have been a misinterpretation by the White House reporter for PBS, but that's what she suggested, is that's actually the implication. If you got kids who are unvaccinated, you got to wear a mask in your house. It's just nuts now. But how can they square that with a straight face without us saying, "Oh, you guys are just joking around with us now"?
They can't. And if masks work, you don't need a vaccine. If vaccines work, then you don't need a mask. And now they're telling you you need both. Biden wants to force members who work for the government, federal workers, they want to force people to be vaccinated, even despite their own doctor telling them that is not in their best healthcare interest, because there's, at this point, more than 4,000 people in this country who have died just from the vaccine. So that should be a personal choice. If you're high risk and you feel like you want to go and get vaccinated because you don't want to get COVID, then by all means, you have the freedom in this country to do that. For our government now to order and mandate federal workers to take the vaccine, it's like we're living in communist China or in Cuba. And that's how they want to run the things. And then, if you get vaccinated, you're still going to be forced to wear a mask. Nothing makes sense. Nothing is following the science that they're saying that they follow. All the while, like general Americans who are listening to this from the CDC, they're so confused as to what it is they're supposed to be doing to protect themselves. I should go get vaccinated. Well, now you're vaccinated. Now I have to wear a mask. It's absolutely the most insane thing I've ever seen happen, and it's just atrocious that we have a federal government that is pushing this garbage out.
Well, so here's the tough one, Congressman, because you're part of the federal government, and a lot of people in this audience are trying to figure out, well, what can the Republicans be doing here? I know it's not an easy battle. I know it's an uphill climb, but it just feels like the whole country getting hoodwinked on this is it's just beyond frustrating at this point for this audience.
Well, more and more states like Florida and Texas, who have started to take very strong stands against the federal government, need to continue to do that. We have an invasion in our southern border, so states like Texas and Florida are standing up and saying, all right, federal government, you're not going to do your job. We're going to do it for you. We're going to send our own National Guard troops. We're going to send our own law enforcement to police the southern border in support of protection of the actual federal law that, oh, by the way, Biden, you are violating federal law by ignoring what current federal law is at the border. This House impeached President Trump over a phone call to a foreign leader, yet we have a president who is willfully violating federal law in violation of his oath to the Constitution, and nobody in the mainstream media and nobody in Congress wants to do absolutely anything about it. It's the most frustrating thing. I'm at the point now where I'm leaving today from Washington. I'm going to proxy vote in defiance of, I'm not wearing a mask on the floor. I'm not wearing a mask in this building that Pelosi just, from her edict of being queen of the House yesterday, said we're now going to be required to do it. And if we don't do it, we're going to be fined. And, oh, by the way, it can't just be a normal mask. You have to wear a medical-grade mask, which there's absolutely no science to back any of this stuff up. And I'm going to go home and proxy vote and make a big deal about the fact that they are forcing this on the American people after they've said, oh, no, you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask.
You know, the medical grade mask thing is another thing that's big because, again, this is one where I don't like to bring my wife into this a lot, but she was a frontline doctor, and when she got fitted for a mask, it's an incredibly elaborate process. It's very time consuming and somewhat stressful. And that's what you go through if you're really serious about stopping the virus. We were told to put on these cloth face diapers from China and told that this is going to fix this. And of course, it was never going to fix it. And we're over a year into the masking. And as far as we know, we have no clue if it's done any good at all. And yet now we're told that even if you're vaccinated, you have to wear it. And I think people have had enough of this for the most part, unless they haven't, Congressman. And this is what's very interesting. Unless you kind of enjoy it. And this is what's very disturbing to me, is that if you're a vaccinated person, why should you have to put the mask back on because not as many people have been vaccinated? And if you're an unvaccinated person, why is the government compelling you to take experimental medicine? Both of these things are very scary, and they're happening simultaneously.
Absolutely. And Pelosi and these Democrats love nothing more than to telling members and Republicans and other people what they have to do with their face, what they have to do with all these procedures, that they have to get a vaccine that is, again, only authorized for emergency use. The FDA hasn't even approved it because there's been so many issues with reactions to the vaccine. And you're right. I was in the military, and we went through what was called MOP training for chemical warfare and all of that. If you don't have a properly sealed mask and your entire body isn't protected from something as small as a virus, then you're still at risk for infection, and you're still going to get infection if you're taking your hands and taking your mask on and off, and you have a KN95,
absolutely.
but it's not properly sealed, and you're not wearing it all day long, and you're not sanitizing before and after you're taking it on and off, then it does you absolutely no good. And anybody that was in the service and went through MOP training understands what that's like.
Yeah, and that is the people who are really at significant risk. That's how they're being treated. Why are we being treated? I'm just going to go to the gas station and at the car wash and get a buy one mask for $3 or two for $5, and that's going to solve the whole thing. It's absurd. It's anyway. I want to move on because I want to play a clip of something that we were all treated to. This is a guy, Officer Harry Dunn, the House hearing on the January 6th riots. 6A, Mr. Paul.
This wasn't the first time that, if I can just use this quote, that the MAGA people came up here to the Capitol before. They were in D.C. before. There were some skirmishes, but it was never the attempt to overthrow democracy. They came up, I think this was maybe their second or third time that they had come up on January 6th. And even then, as belligerent as they were, it didn't account to this violence. So the only difference that I see in that is that they had marching orders, so to say. When people feel emboldened by people in power, they assume that they're right. Like the one of the scariest things about January 6th is that the people that were there, even to this day, think that they were right. They think that they were right, and that makes for a scary recipe for the future of this country.
This guy's a left-wing activist. He's praised Ilhan Omar. He's attacked Trump on a number of occasions as a racist. He attacks all sorts of different people. He calls himself a insurrectionist stopper on his Twitter. He goes after Tucker Carlson on Twitter. This is a left-wing guy who is an activist, and he's being touted as some sort of an authority on this. It's what I'm saying, Congressman. It's all so farcical what's going on.
Well, and you can't tell me that Pelosi didn't handpick every one of those officers that testified yesterday for that very purpose. She handpicked people like that who were going to say things like they said yesterday, again, tying it all back to they had their marching orders. Well, obviously, he's alluding to the marching orders from Trump, which they impeached him for on the second time, which if you read the transcript, he never said go up to the Capitol and break into the Capitol and disturb what was going on there. He said peacefully and patriotically, let your voices be heard. And so they're trying again. Pelosi wants to keep this Trump narrative going for as long as they possibly can because they are completely fearful of the fact that if he runs again in 24, he's going to stand a very good chance of winning, and they're trying to keep this narrative going for as long as they can.
So let's try to connect all of this. What is the plan? What are they trying to do with this commission? Because I know it seems like it is just theater. But to what ends? Is it just to distract us from the rest of the problems that are happening in society?
I think that's part of it. I think part of it is let's distract from the border crisis. Like I just happened to have a press hit yesterday. I didn't even know where the January 6th Commission meeting was. I walk up to the third floor of Cannon, and there is press everywhere. The most press I've seen since the Mueller hearing, since the Cohen hearing, since the impeachment stuff that went through the Judiciary Committee. So all of these press people are all paying attention to this January 6th Commission. They're not paying attention to the ridiculousness coming out of the CDC, the inaction by Biden, what's happening in Cuba, the invasion on our southern border, all of the things that are happening that really affect the security and safety of Americans. All the press is focused on this spectacle, this drama that's been created by Pelosi and the Democrats. They're not focused on all of that stuff. So that's part of it. And the other part of it is they want to draw out the Trump narrative for as long as they possibly can, and one, keep that off of all the other horrible things that are happening in our country that they could do something about, and two, keep this negative taste in the mainstream media about Trump. Because without Trump in office, they don't have anything positive to talk about because they can't talk about the good things that the Biden administration is doing because they're not doing any of those things. So as long as Pelosi, and I bet this commission lasts for as long as Pelosi's in office, I bet this committee lasts until next year. And every couple of weeks, every couple of months, they're going to have another hearing and march up other people to talk about how horrible it was and what a failure it was and how it was Trump's fault. Instead of asking the real questions, why did Pelosi refused to bring in National Guard troops when her own sergeant of arms and police chief at the time, who's now resigned, was saying we need to bring in reinforcements? Why didn't they not use the intelligence that they had from the FBI? Why aren't we hearing about the report of the investigation on Ashley Babbitt? Why aren't we hearing those answers? So they're not going to talk about any of that. That if it was a legitimate investigation into it would be happening. They're going to talk about all this other stuff to keep the narrative moving that all of this is Trump's fault.
So what is it that can be done, though? Because it just feels like the Democrats running the tables on Republicans and distracting us from all the horrible things that are happening is still, in a way, even if it's all somewhat hilarious and it's easy to debunk, they're still controlling the narrative, and there's very little pushback that I'm seeing from the Republican side of the aisle right now, other than some good talking points. But what more can be done?
And that's the challenge in the House. Without the Speaker's gavel, you can't pass bills. You can't. I mean, and now that Trump's not in office, and we don't even have the White House, and we don't have a majority in the Senate, you're not going to get any movement from any agency. You're not going to get movement from the DOJ on things that should be investigated. They don't even respond to my letters as it relates to questions of the DOJ, questions to the AG, questions to administrators in Biden's administration, because we're Republicans. So we have to fight and put ourselves in a position where we win the majority back in 2022. I think that's going to happen overwhelmingly, and then you'll see a complete change in the way that the House is going to be operated, real investigations done with real answers as it relates to a lot of these things, and actual beneficial policy coming out of the House that affects the American people for the good.
Let me ask you about some of the economic indicators that are going on, and they're really bad. There's huge supply chain interruptions that people seem to be getting used to, which has slowed down spending. They've slowed down car sales. It's slowed down sales of all sorts of things. Home sales are falling off a cliff. You've got the record prices in some essential goods that people have to buy. All of this, of course, is more acutely affecting working and middle-class people, and yet barely gets a mention. Even on shows like this, we can't focus on it because we got to do these other things like the mask mandates and the January 6th stuff. It's still no one's giving this enough attention. What are your thoughts on this?
We are seeing record inflation that we haven't seen in decades, and it's because of the amount of money that Biden is dumping on the economy. That $1.9 trillion on top of all the spending over last year that Biden got through with not a single Republican vote in the House and Senate, which says a lot because we have some more moderate members in the House and the Senate. Not a single Republican vote, and it was because they're dumping money in social welfare programs. People don't want to go to work because they're making more money sitting at home. That's part of the problem. But when you dump this amount of money into the economy, you're going to have inflation. Inflation right now is at 5%. I talked to an expert who's an economist who thinks it may be as high as 10%. And you are taxing everyday Americans because their grocery bill costs more. Gas is twice what it was under the Trump administration a year ago. So it's costing more to get to work every day if you are working. It's costing more to feed your family. It's costing more to do everyday things, which is impacting the overall economy, and you're going to see the economy start to shrink as a result of it. We had the best economic numbers in the history of our nation right before the pandemic while Trump was in office. And it was because of the Republican conservative policies that were put in place. Tax cuts, not giving out free money to anybody that wants to do it to not work, encouraging people to work, the lowest unemployment rates in minorities in the history of our country, and it's because the economy was growing, people wanted to work, they had incentives to work, and they weren't getting free stuff from the government. You have the complete opposite now, and I think they're starting to see that this is going to be a real problem for them with middle-class voters because they're noticing that when they go to the gas pump, it's twice as much as it was a year ago. When they go to get eggs, when they go to get bread, when they go to get all of these things, it's more expensive. And you're talking about manufacturing, that type of thing. My wife and I put a down payment out on a Bronco a year ago, a 2021 Bronco. We still don't have a Bronco because Ford can't manufacture the trucks because they don't have the parts from China that they need. And they don't know when that's going to be. So you're seeing these huge pressures on manufacturing, on all of these things, because we're not getting the supply chain in that we need, which is putting pressure on every facet of the economy. And you're right, more people need to be talking about it. They're not talking about it because that affects every single American, regardless of how much money you make, regardless of what your job is, because you're paying more everywhere you go.
Congressman Greg Steube, Republican from Florida, at Rep. Greg Steube on Twitter. Thanks, Congressman. Appreciate the time.
Yep, thank you.
Take a quick break. Be right back.